What's up, agency owners? Jason Swenk here, and I'm excited to have an amazing guest. Now, this guest has been in the agency world for a very long time. He started when he was one, and he's grown several agencies. And the current agency that he's a global CEO has over 500 employees. They're approaching 90 million in revenue, and they've done over 40 acquisitions over the his lifetime. And I'm real excited to get into it. So let's jump into the episode. Hey, Don, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to see you. Glad to be
Awesome.
here.
Well, I'm excited to chat with you and learn from you because you've been in it for a long time and you have a lot of experience. So, for the ones that have not heard of you yet, tell us who you are and what do you do?
My name's Don Scales. I am global CEO of a company called Investis Digital, which is a UK-based company. It's private equity owned by Investcorp. We just recently exited from a 6-year relationship with a company called ECI out of London. So we're very excited about our Investcorp relation. Then prior to that, I was CEO of a company I'm sure you heard of called iCrossing. iCrossing, we managed to take that to 100 and some 140 million, exited to Hearst several years back. So I was there for a good 8 years, 9 years. And then prior to that, I was CEO of a company called agency.com, which is a pioneer in the web development space. I mean, it's if you will, one of the founding companies of web development. So takes me back all the way to 1999. So in the digital age, that's kind of like dog years. So I've been around a long time.
Yeah, I started our agency in '99, and yeah, I used to love those days. It was kind of like no one knew what websites were, and I could
Oh,
literally go through
exactly.
the yellow pages and go, "Oh, you don't have a website here." So,
Oh, and in fact, you'll get a kick out of this. Back in the day, people would send us RFPs, and we'd send them an invoice for 50 grand just to read their RFP. So, and
I
that was
love it.
good business.
I love it. Well, I think we're going to get along well because I always looked at RFP as, stands for a couple things: request for punishment,
Yes.
as one of them. The other ones I probably won't name on this show right now. I don't know if I can talk to you that way. So, but tell us. Well, let's jump into that because that's interesting. Why would you send an invoice for 50 grand to respond to their RFP?
Because, like you said, you could go to the yellow pages. There was just such a demand, and we had very limited resources of people who could do this kind of work. And so we had to make sure that every minute of every day was paid for in some way, shape, or form. And if the market would take it, and they did, and if they'd pay it, we'll invoice you.
Oh, that's the biggest foot in the door I've ever seen. So I always believe in like charging something a slice off of your core offer, in order to, kind of see if they're serious and also kind of, prove like the relationship back and forth. But you guys have the win right now of the highest foot in the door yet. And you guys said you converted too. That's awesome.
Yeah, we did. And then, then everything changed in 2000. It was just the whole market went evaporated on you. So it
Well,
was a
that's
wild time back then. It was
well,
truly
that's
a
what
wild
helped us
time.
little guys back then when the
Yeah.
market crashed. I was like, all these big guys going down, here's our opportunity. Let's get on, what I call the strategy line where everybody else is kind of cringing and kind of like they're on that roller coaster. And that's what allowed us to really
It
grow.
was it was one of those times where there were so many bigger companies. The biggest thing that hit people back then was when as you got bigger, they all invested in real estate. And after that, you had all these fixed commitments in real estate. Then the market just evaporates and they're stuck there with all that office space.
Yeah. So what's the key? You've seen so many agencies go from a certain size and just blow it up. And a lot of people listening, they're in the million mark. They're trying to get to the 8-figure mark. Some of the 8-figure guys are trying to get to the 9-figure and 10 and so on. And you've gone through many, many levels. So, what are some things that, if you're right in the middle of, like, let's say a $5 million agency, what do you need to do in order really kind of to accelerate your growth that you've seen?
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's an evolution. So let me get to the $5 million mark. I mean, when you're a very small agency and you're a founder, the biggest thing you have to learn in order to get to the next level is you have to learn to delegate. And so if you can find the right people, and if you continue to have to do it all yourself, then you'll never scale. But if you can find the right people and you're willing to delegate, and you may make some mistakes, and if you do, but you can still move on from those mistakes and you'll have a chance to delegate. And then beyond that, as you continue on, you have to bring in more discipline in your organization structure. And there's a lot of research that shows that most agencies sort of tap out either one right there at that where the owner has to start delegating. That's one key point. And then there seems to be another flex point right around 75 to 100 employees that for some reason is that's when the organization becomes not as flat and it gets a little bit more widespread. And so you have different players involved, and that seems to be a place where organizations have hard times as well. Once you get past 100 employees, I think you can scale you can do a pretty good job of getting scaled because if you manage to get the structure, you have the discipline, and you have the management team in there, then you got a lot of the right parts.
How I always look at, in our agency mastermind, especially with the guys that are close to that, we're always talking about recruiting and really how can we make our leaders better leaders. Like that's our
Hmm.
major focus rather than how do we make ourselves better, right? Because like we're literally kind of replacing ourselves. So what have you seen working well, or what's worked for you in the past to make your leaders better? Like you brought them in at a certain level, how did you keep getting them up to the next?
Well, I think what you have, first of all, you have to be willing to let them grow with you. So I mean, like you have to uh, give them something that maybe is not necessarily in their sweet spot, but it's a growth opportunity, and you have to be willing to let people make a mistake if they're going to make a mistake. If you're not the type that can deal with the issues of making a mistake or a client failure of some sort, then it's going to be difficult because then you have to take these people, dust them off, tell them what they did wrong, pat them on the rear end, and send them off and go do it again. And eventually, they start building up a real good, experience base, and they can do this stuff on their own. And that's how you build a team. And then once you build that team, you stay with it. Now, I've found that the best way to build a team and hang on to the team is I'm a firm believer that as an executive, you have to be very consistent in your leadership style. And so if you go to work every day and one day you're just a normal guy, and the next day you're ranting and raving and you want to shoot anybody that walks in the door, nobody's going to want to work for you in the long run. But if people says, I know Don, he's always this way, and he's consistent, and you're consistent in your thinking, and you make decisions so that it's almost transparent to these people how you're making your decisions, then they're going to learn how to make decisions very much akin to how you make decisions. And that's how you get a team that sort of has staying power.
Yeah, I looked at it too of going. Someone shared with me many years ago. It's called the 1-3-1 method, or I think it's called
Hmm.
that. But whenever your team would come to you, and think about as you're building an agency, your team's always coming to you because, especially in the beginning, you're like the toll booth. Everything's flowing through you. And
Hmm.
whenever they would say, hey, here's the challenge. What do you think we need to do? Like they would ask me, and I'm like, no, 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 no. Like what are three options that you think we need to do?
Mhm.
And then what's your recommendation? And if they do that enough, then they're just going to stop coming to you for these things,
Exactly.
and they'll
No,
start
exactly.
solving it. And then they'll do that with their team. Because I looked at it, our whole goal was, my job is to coach and mentor my leadership team. And then it should trickle down. I love that you said consistency too, because I was talking to an agency the other day. I'm like, man, you're all over the place. Like one day you're up here, another day you're the tyrant here,
Yeah.
and it's just
And as an employee, you come to work and you don't know which boss is going to show up today. That's not the kind of place you probably want to work at for the long haul.
yeah, exactly. Well, let's kind of switch focus a little bit, and talk about, why do you think, obviously you've gone through, over 40 acquisitions. Why do you think a high percentage of mergers or acquisitions actually
Mm.
fail?
It's a great question, and it's probably on page one or two of my new book that's coming out. If you look at, if you, I believe if you look at the diligence process that people go through, and you start looking at what people really examine when they're looking at potentially buying a company, what you find is that they don't spend a whole lot of time looking at the value set of these companies that they're looking to buy. So you don't really have a good, keen understanding of whether or not the value set of the people you're buying is in alignment with the value set that your company has. So I talk about in the book this whole thing called a value compatibility profile, and what kind of alignments you see in these values. And so if and then when these companies fail, and if you go read, you read in the press or you read in the literature, the first thing people say, well, the values weren't in alignment, the cultures were off. Well, it shouldn't be a big surprise to anybody that these things failed if you didn't spend enough time on the front end, that if when they do fail, that these are the cause on the back end. So that's my belief, is that we spend too much time on the hard stuff like the financial stuff, and we don't spend enough time on the values compatibility and the alignment of values, because that's going to really dictate much of how these two companies come together.
Yeah, I always tell everybody, and I did this when we were acquired. I wanted to sit in their office for a couple days, like a fly on the wall, and
Exactly.
I wanted to see, are these people happy? Do they joke around? Like, I'm obviously
Exactly.
not a corporate type, so if we were going to be acquired by someone very corporate, it would have just been a complete utter
Well,
disaster.
I have this good story I tell, that back in the day, when I was at iCrossing, there's this amazing agency, AKQA, that and Tom Bedicari, who was a CEO there for years, and at one point, uh, GA, who owned them, and then we had Goldman Sachs and some other people owned it. They had this idea that we were going to possibly merge the two, and it would create this really powerhouse in the marketplace, a creative powerhouse like AKQA, and then a performance media powerhouse like iCrossing. You could bring that together, and I think it would have reshaped some of the agency business. Well, so they were talking about merging it, and the first thing you have to do is you have to look at it and say, well, can people get along? Can the CEOs even get along? So, Tom and I get together, and the board calls us up and says, "Look, we want to know if you guys can make this work. We want you guys to take a weekend and go to Sonoma, go to Napa Valley for a weekend, have some wine, just sit around and talk." So that's what we did. We went up there and spent the entire weekend up there just to see if we even liked each other. I found out about his kids. He found out about my life. And at the end of the day, I found out what was important to him. He found out what was important to me. And we figured out a way this thing could work. Now, the deal fell apart for other reasons, but that part of it would have worked its way through. And that's just because we put in the time up front.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. Now, outside of values and matching the culture, what are the numbers like when you were acquiring agencies, what are the numbers that really matter to you to make sure, or what's a good acquisition for you?
Well, experience has shown me that if you're going to get what you pay for, right? And so like if you're looking to get something on the cheap, then chances are you're going to get something cheap. And
Right.
you're going to be spending a lot of time fixing it. And so if you're into reclamation projects, that's a whole different world. And if you really want to grow, you don't want to spend all your life fixing what you just bought. So I'm a firm believer that you pay a fair price. I don't, and you got to be willing to walk away. So for me, it's understanding what the true and I'm not into since we're talking about services businesses, it really has to be more EBITDA based than it's going to be revenue based, as opposed to a lot of these technology businesses that we see. But so on EBITDA based, I know what multiples ought to be in play. So if people are willing, that what you really find, and you know this because you've seen it as many times as I have, is that most of these owners think they're the unicorn out there, and they want the one-off multiple that nobody's ever seen before,
Yeah.
and that's just not going to happen. So you have to get people to take a dose of reality and come down to earth, and if they get real, then you have the basis of starting a discussion about getting something done.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned EBITDA because that's how we've always based it on. And I always used to love when people would say, "Oh, we're a $10 million agency, we're a $20 million agency," and I'm like, "Well, what's the profit?" And they're like, "Oh, we're like a 5% margin." I'm like, "Oh," I was like, "That's horrible."
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I also agree with you too. A lot of times when we actually at Republics we started buying agencies, like we don't buy anybody under a million in EBITDA. It just there's the same amount of work. And a lot of people are like, especially when the pandemic happened, they're like, "Oh, we're going to grab up all these people that are struggling." I'm like, I'd rather grab the people that are growing.
That
Like,
I'll tell you a really funny story was when I was at agency.com and I was sitting there talking to John Wren, who's the head of Omnicom, and he's bought more companies than anybody I know. And so he was telling me one day, he said, Scales, let me give you a piece of advice on how to deal with acquisitions. He says, until a company gets over $1 million in EBITDA, he says, you just fly over the top and you wave to them from the airplane. So no, don't ever go visit till they get over $1 million in EBITDA. Then you'll stop in and see them.
that's
He was
awesome.
probably right.
Oh, definitely. It's so right. Right. Because I feel that businesses can hit a couple million by accident,
Exactly.
but to get to a
And they
million
can
in
lose a
EBITDA,
couple
it's a
million
little
by
bit more
accident
challenging.
too. They can go both ways by accident too in those cases. Yeah.
Exactly. What are the multiples that you're seeing for, let's say, 1 to about 3 million in EBITDA?
Uh, I wouldn't pay from 1 to 3 million. I mean, like you said, some of that can be by accident, and you got to. But I'd say probably it's still single digits for me.
Hmm.
I'm not going to be paying. I'd probably pay 6 to 8, maybe somewhere in there, but not much more. I can't see much more than that.
Yeah. When does it really start jumping up to the double digits?
Uh, I think one, when you get a little bit of scale to it. So I mean, once you get to a point where there's not 50 other people that look just like you. So I mean, if you get, I can recall when we hit at iCrossing and we actually merged with ProxyCom, and that took us over $100 million in revenue, and we were at I forgot like 20 some odd percent on EBITDA. That put us into such that put us into such a sort of rarefied air in the agency business. First of all, you don't see that many agencies go over 100 million, and then you don't see that many agencies making that kind of EBITDA. That got us, we ended up making in the high teens. And so it's that, where it's really the scarcity
Yeah.
factor that drives it. So if you're a $3 or $5 million agency, then you better have a real unique proposition that's going to be able to get something in the marketplace that's going to be differentiable, because there's a lot of those out there.
Yeah. Do you look at it as specialization as something that separates agencies rather than saying, the typical we're a full service Me Too agency?
Well, there's two things one is we're a full service agency, and two is, yeah, we deserve it because we have such great people. We have unique people. Everybody says that. So when I hear that, I'm thinking, oh, they
Or
don't have a
what is it? The
story.
three P's: process, portfolio, and people.
Okay. But so when you start hearing that, then you wonder what their strategy and what their story is. But if they can, I mean, if they have that 30-second elevator speech cold, and they can tell you exactly who their market is and what they're trying to accomplish, then you pay attention.
Yeah. What about, so when you guys merged and you took your guys' revenue, you guys became 100 million and 20 million in EBITDA, right? How long did you guys have to stay merged together before you exited? Because just I found, and what we're finding too, is like just putting all these companies together, you have to make it work for some time for a
Yeah,
buyer to
right.
treat you seriously.
Yeah, I think what you have is typically, right after something like that, you're going to take at least a year to get all the kinks out. And so you're going to have turnover, you're going to have this, you're going to have that, you're going to lose some clients, you got all these kind of issues you had to work your way through. And then after that, you probably got another year of sort of demonstrating that you could manage it and run it right. So you're looking at probably at least 2 years
Mhm.
before you can really do something with something like that.
Yeah. And let's talk about kind of uh, margins, because a lot of people, especially on the lower end, the people that you're flying over and waving to. I love
I
that, the
love it.
flyover.
It's a great story.
That is
And he said it
awesome.
with such a straight face too.
And he was a part of the CEO of Omnicom. Was that right?
Omnicom is built on acquisition. He's
Oh, I
probably
know.
done. He's probably done 1,000 acquisitions in his day. I don't even know.
That's hilarious. I love it. So the people that we're flying over, a lot of times, their margins are at 10, 15%. And they're like, oh, that's good. Or even 20%. And I look at that as going, I feel that's below average. So what do you think
Yeah,
average is
yeah.
for profit margins?
Yeah, and since I spent enough time in Omnicom, I'll quote John Wren one more time. I mean, John Wren used to say, if you really want to be an exceptional agency, then your cost, your overhead's 20%, your direct cost is 60%, your margins are 20. He said, and it's a very simple business, Don. He said, you make 20% every year. He says, you'll never hear from me. I'm happy, and yeah, I won't ever bother you. So, I mean, that's kind of the way I looked at it, was that and you have to take that. I mean, there's so many CEOs that just don't have that makeup to focus on that number, and be focused on that 20% or better. And now I've always, and over the years, because we've gone more from services, and now it's sort of this mix of technology and services. And now 20 years ago, we didn't hear about recurring revenue. And now there's all this talk about how much of your business is recurring versus repeat versus this and that. But it's all the same. It's now you have to be a little bit more focused, and you do have the opportunity to get higher margins as a result of all this. But if you pure services business, you ought to be shooting for at least 20%.
Yeah, I love it. And you kind of alluded a little bit to, the reoccurring model, because when I did the first agency, about 85% was just project based. Like we would go into
Yeah,
Lotus cars and we'd go into Hitachi and
exactly.
right. and just, but we had a machine for our pipeline that could, like, it was predictable for us. Now going around, it's kind of a little different. And I actually kind of love reoccurring because it's predictable, especially when we're buying
Yeah.
someone. So what's your
And
thoughts
that's where
on
you're
that?
going to get the margin. That's where you're going to get the margin. Nobody's going to pay you for project-based businesses now. Even if you have, like you said, even if you have a machine that can crank out new opportunities, nobody's going to pay you because they can't look forward. They can't see it beyond a certain amount of time as to what you're going to have, what your business is. No matter how you could have 5 years of great project-based business results, but because they can't see more than 3 or 4 months in the future, they're not going to pay you that higher multiple. But as you get more recurring what we call repeat, which is meaning that you're not necessarily going from contract to contract, you're on more or less 12 months kind of contracts. They may be on auto renewals, those kinds of things where you're not having to go out and renegotiate something every 3 months. Then you can start, then people respect your business a little bit more and they value business a little more highly.
Yeah. And what I've always seen, especially when we're going in doing evaluation, of going, well, you might get your valuation, but most of it's going to be tied into an earnout because there's no
Yeah,
predictability.
exactly. No, that's exactly right. And it depends on if you're a fan of earnouts or not. But
Oof, no.
I'm right there with you. I'm not a big fan
I was
of
screwed by that one. I
I've been
wish I
screwed
read your
on both
book.
sides of that one.
I know. I know. Yeah, I've been on both sides, and especially when we're doing it now, is like, we've always structured the earnout now to make it fair, and we're like, we're not going to base it on time. We'll base it on when you hit this. So, like, if an
Yeah.
agency comes to us and says, I'll hold off, Jason, and you can buy us next year because I feel we're going to be double. And we'll be like, okay, well, if you feel that, why don't we put an earnout on that? So when you hit the
Exactly.
double, we'll give it to you. There's no set time, so we can screw you. Like, it has to win,
Yeah.
like, it be a win-win. I'm tired of
That's
people
exactly
taking
right.
advantage of people.
And generally takes them twice as long to hit the double,
Oh yeah, or
even if they get there.
if they get there, yeah, right. Exactly. They're just, I think they're trying to buff up, and then they also, what they tell us, they go, well, we want to stay on for the long haul. I'm like, no, you'd probably be the worst employee. I know I was the worst employee ever.
I
So
mean, especially it's really hard to you get a successful entrepreneur who started an agency or started 2 or 3 agencies. Yeah, they're not the best employees. And
yeah,
I mean, the guy I had the most respect for, who started iCrossing, and he couldn't work for anybody else. It just wouldn't work.
yeah, that's me. Um, Last question I have for you, Don, is, as a global CEO of one of the big agencies, what are your roles? Like, what do you look at as your role in the agency? Like, if you had to pick like 3 or 4 roles.
I think really my role is to provide two things. One is, depending on what you have to articulate what the strategy is, and in some cases that's a little easier in other cases. But I have to articulate what the strategy is, and then I have to provide a culture and an environment by which people can go accomplish those goals. But you have to give people, you have to show them the direction, you have to give them the tools by which they can go do it, and you got to get out of their way and let them do it. And those are the key things.
Yeah, that's kind of what I looked at when I started getting up in a little the gray hairs. I started figuring out that part of, like, getting out of people's way, and it's
Oh,
more of,
and the good ones, I have some people who've been with me here at the Investors Digital. I've had people who've been with me for 20 years. This is their third company we worked at together, and they're some of the best people in the world. And that's the reason, is because I'm smart enough to know when to get out of their way.
yeah. I always said I wanted to be the dumbest person in the room at the
Exactly.
company, and that was not hard for me.
I think Reagan said that too one time, didn't he? He said, "You
I
want to
don't
be
know.
the dumbest guy in the room." I said
Yeah.
one time, I think he said something like that.
Oh, that's funny. But well, Don, this has all been amazing. Is there anything I didn't ask you before we tell people where they
Uh,
can get the book?
I think I probably, I thought maybe you might ask me, like, give me one funny story that came out of doing one of these acquisitions. I had one good one I was going to tell you
Go
if
for
I
it.
got a second. Yeah, so the first acquisition I ever did at iCrossing was a company called Newgate Internet. It was in Sausalito, California. And we had spent all this time and effort getting this right. We had dotted all the I's and crossed the T's. And we wanted to make sure that the board was really standing behind us. And so we got all excited. We got this deal done. So we went out there, myself and CEO of iCrossing at the time. We went out there and went to Sausalito. And so we meet the CEO of Newgate Internet at the front door, and we're talking to him. And I said, "Okay, is everybody ready?" "Yeah, I got the whole team together. We're going to introduce you guys. This is going to be great." So we walk in, and the CEO stands up in front of his group, which is probably about 50 to 75 people. And he says, "Well, I have some news for you guys." He said, "You don't know this, but for the last 6 months, I've been trying to sell the company." And he says, "I've actually been successful at doing so." And so your new owners here, Jeff and Don, they're from a company called iCrossing. They're going to be your new bosses. And today's my last day. And I'll be leaving as soon as I finish speaking here. It's been great working with you for the last 6 years, and I hope to see you guys soon. And he literally picked up and walked out the fire escape and never came back. And Jeff and I are looking at each other like, "Holy cow, what are we going to do now?" So we had to figure this out on the fly in front of 75 people who didn't even know they were being sold. And, it worked its way through. But there was that, oh my God moment there where it's like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do now? So
Oh,
that
wow.
was that was our first deal at iCrossing.
That's awesome. I mean, literally, he got the mic, he dropped it, and then just
And walked
bounced.
right out the fire escape.
The fire escape, too. What, was
He
he
didn't go
afraid
out
that
the
you guys are going
front
to pull the
door. He
elevator,
didn't
like
even,
to stop the
I think
elevator?
he was so embarrassed about just pulling the fast one there. He just didn't even want to wait to go out the front door. He didn't want to say goodbye to anybody. He just left.
Wow. So was it a good acquisition, or did you find a lot of
Yeah, it turned
skeletons?
out really good. I mean, they were really experts in paid media. And they really set the tone for iCrossing for years in paid media. Then we got some really fantastic people out of that. But it has bumps in the early days, that's for sure.
It's crazy. I mean, literally, like,
It was it was
I
pretty
can only
funny.
imagine, like, and I'm picturing. I know what you're talking about fire escape, but I see like the New York fire escapes, like him
Yeah,
sliding it down
exactly. With the ladder and
with the
everything.
ladder.
They don't have they don't have those in Sausalito. The buildings aren't that tall,
I
but
know, but that would be. You should embellish that a little bit, like be like,
yeah,
hey,
I should. Oh, from the 30th floor.
yeah, he just slid down like he was James
I slid
Bond.
down. Yeah, I need to build this up a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, you got to sell it. You're sell it a little bit.
Exactly.
Awesome.
It is in the book, though. You can read about it in the book.
Cool. Well, what's the name of the book? And obviously, we
The
probably can get
M&A
it anywhere,
solution.
right?
You can get it's from Forbes Books. It's out on Amazon for pre-sale right now. It comes out June 6th, and it's called the M&A Solution.
Awesome. Well, everyone, go check it out. And then, what's the agency URL? People can go and check out the agency as well.
I'm sorry, the agency that I'm at right now
Yep,
is
exactly.
called Invested Digital. And like I said, it's London based, and we just got bought by InvestCorp. So, yeah, check us out.
Awesome. Well, Don, thanks so much for coming on the show. It was a lot of fun hearing some of the old stories. Make sure all of you go check out the book, check out the agency as well. And if you guys enjoyed this episode and you guys want to be surrounded by amazing agency owners that are sharing what's working now so you guys can scale faster and really know that you're doing it in the right way, I'd love to invite all of you to go to digitalagencyelite.com. Check it out, apply. If you're right for us, we'll have a conversation. And until next time, have a swank day.